The men's club gives men, and we have a few intrepid women as members as well, an opportunity to put into practice the motto of the men's club, which is putting Jewish values into practice in everyday life. We're committed to do this through our monthly programs, through our Burning Bush Award, our special events, and one of those special events is what we have tonight. I want to say just a word about our monthly meetings because I would really love to see all of you there. We have them the first Tuesday of every month, and we bring together outstanding, and I mean really outstanding speakers to talk about matters of public interest, Jewish interest, personal growth as well. We're in the middle of our mini-series called How Judaism Matters, and just last month we had the first series. It was a talk by Rabbi Wolpe on, the official title was The Meaning of Life from a Jewish Perspective, and Rabbi Wolpe quickly renamed it The Meanings of Life. It was an extraordinary, really an extraordinary evening with over 250 people, and he quickly gave a brilliant, insightful message on how we can improve the quality of our lives. If you were there, I'm sure you have not forgotten it. If you weren't there, you could still hear it and see it, in fact, by going on our website, Sinai Temple website, because it was video recorded. The second in our series is coming up. It's November 4, when David Suissa, who is the president of the Jewish Journal, noted Jewish commentator and a speaker extraordinaire, will speak on making rituals meaningful. How often do we engage in ritual practice and we find it empty, devoid of real meaning? But these rituals are really critical to our Jewish way of life, and this will be, I guarantee it, an unforgettable evening, and you won't want to miss it. The final in our series will be by Rabbi Brad Artson, who will talk about the wisdom of the Torah. He's going to give examples from the Torah, these priceless pearls of wisdom from the Torah to help us in our everyday life. All these dates, these events, all of them through 2015 are on our website, and I encourage you to visit them. And yes, each one of our meetings is followed by a delicious meal, which is free to our members. Milton Friedman said there's no such thing as a free lunch. He didn't know about Sinai Temple Men's Club dinners, so they are free. And people have wonderful food, they linger, they talk about the thought-provoking topic they just heard. Tonight's program is one of the things that I love most about the Men's Club. It gives our members an opportunity to show their leadership and to put their interests and their passions into practice. The chairman of tonight's event is Mark Helasim, our executive vice president. And Mark said we should do a debate between Ted Lieu and Elan Carr. After all, he argued, Sinai Temple is in this congressional district. And many of our members are in the congressional district, and it is a very important congressional seat being vacated by Henry Waxman, who had an extraordinary influence nationally, internationally, and of course locally. So it's very important, he said. And he formed a committee of dedicated Men's Club members. He organized it, enticed Rabbi Wolpe to be the moderator, and then Sinai Temple made its facilities available. So here we are. Now, for those of you who are members of the Men's Club, I encourage you to bring your passions and your interests and your desires forward, and let's lead and let's put them into practice. Become involved. For those of you who are not members, who are not yet members, I paraphrase our former president of the synagogue and former mayor of Beverly Hills, Jimmy Dalshed. There are just two types of Jewish men, those who are members of the Men's Club and those who are not yet members of the Men's Club. So we welcome your membership, your energy, and most of all, your friendship. To be a member of the Men's Club, you do not have to be a member of Sinai Temple, but you should be a member of Sinai Temple. And many of the members of the Men's Club start out as non-members and become members. One of the treasures we have here at Sinai Temple, and one of the driving forces behind our congregation, is the love of Israel and the commitment of Israel and how we put that into practice. So I'm going to ask Jan Zakowski, who is a former president of the synagogue, and she and her husband, Phil, the latest members of the Men's Club, to come up and spend just 2 to 3 minutes to speak about something extremely important for our community for Israel. Jen?
I want to talk very briefly about two things. First, we're here tonight to listen to the candidates, and that's really important. But that's not the most important thing, and even asking them important questions is not the most important thing. And even voting is not the most important thing. Each of us knows people, friends and family members who have not yet committed to voting in this upcoming election. Each of us can reach out to those people and make sure that they vote. In the last election, there were 6 congressional races that were decided. Someone lost and someone won by less than 1% of the vote. And you know that there were a lot of people in those districts that woke up the next morning and said, oh my God, if I only realized it was going to be that close, I would have made time to go to the polls. That's my first point. Please make sure that you get to the polls and that your friends and family do as well. Not just in this district, but across the country, because there are a lot of very important things being decided now. The second thing I want to talk very briefly about has to do with Iran and Washington, D.C. Last year, the P5+1 and Iran made what we call the Joint Plan of Action. Some people know it as the interim agreement regarding Iran's nuclear program. And that was supposed to end up in a final determination, a final agreement by last July 25th. That deadline came and went, and it was extended to November 25th. We're almost to that point, and who knows what's going to happen. What has been happening, though, is a discussion where members of the House and the Senate, leaders from both the Democrat Party and the Republican Party, have come out with very strong public statements saying it's very important for the administration to bring any proposal to the Congress, that the Congress has a role in deciding what should be put forward in these discussions. The administration's position has said, we absolutely are going to come to the Congress when we come for a final resolution to lift the sanctions in their entirety, but not necessarily when they come to maybe easing things off if we make some kind of adjustment now. That's really an important issue, and it's not a partisan issue. So what does this mean for us? Let me tell you a quick story. Last month I was in Washington, D.C. lobbying with AIPAC. And there were a handful of us speaking with one of the senior staff people from the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And he told us after we had had our discussion, said, I don't know if you really appreciate how important it is that you guys come here and speak with every member of the House and the Senate. He said, and this is, again, one of the top 2 staff people from the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He said, we couldn't do our jobs if somebody wasn't out there talking with all of the members about what's so important about this. So what am I here to ask? I'm here to say, please join us as part of the Sinai delegation to the AIPAC Policy Conference. And when you see that Rabbi Wolpe, Sinai President Joel Weinstein, Men's Club President Carrie Lerman, Rabbi Guzik, Rabbi Sherman, all of them are going to the policy conference this year because it's so important. What they're saying to each of us, is that it's really important for us to go to and for us to invite our friends and family to come with us. AIPAC has a 15% discount on their registration that expires in 2 weeks. This is what the flyer looks like. It's outside. Please call me, contact me. I'm happy to help you get registered. And if you change your mind, you can get a full refund as long as you do before the end of the year. So what am I here to say? Vote, come to Washington, D.C., and bring your family and friends to both of them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan. And Jan is emblematic of the congregation that we have here, the membership, involved, informed, and, as you can see, willing to give up her time. The Sinai Temple has an extensive array of programs and courses. It has a team of clergy led by Rabbi Wolpe that you can only dream of. We have 3 schools here, including one of the preeminent Jewish day schools of the country, Sinai Akiva Academy, several phenomenal youth programs, as you just heard, leadership in support of Israel, inspiring services, especially Shabbat and the high holidays, and support for the inevitable and sometimes unplanned for transitions in life. But Sinai Temple is really more than just all of these parts. My wife, Hallie, and I just returned late last night from a 2-week trip to Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia. Once home to hundreds of thousands of Jews who lived there for over 500 years, establishing the greatest centers of Jewish learning and piety in Europe, including the great Vilna Gaon. But what did we see? Not Jews. They've been murdered. What we saw were abandoned synagogues without people, without programs, without rabbis, without the sound of children's songs. Some had been made into museums, community centers. It was devastating, a devastating sight. We saw the remnants of communities that once had over 100 synagogues, now devoid of Jews, and containing the sad remnants of once great religious centers. The war-torn and dilapidated buildings that we saw were there, but no evidence of Jewish life. So what is Sinai Temple? It's one of the most important centers for Jewish life and learning in the entire United States, let alone Los Angeles. It's a place with many smaller communities of people who are proud to be Jewish, who love Israel, and who want to ensure that their children, they do not leave their children with empty buildings and stories of once was and what might have been. So we welcome you to be part of this great, energetic, comforting Jewish community. You will not regret it. I want to call upon Mark Halassim, who's the chair of the event tonight, and he's going to go over some of the ground rules, and then we'll get on with the debate. Mark?
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you all to tonight's debate. It is important to remind ourselves that despite partisan issues and questions regarding the effectiveness of our electoral system, we have two wonderful candidates that have agreed to participate in tonight's debate in an atmosphere of peace and respect for one another. We're so blessed to live in a country that allows such peaceful and democratic system of election. Which country in the world afford me, a Persian Jew, the opportunity to facilitate a debate moderated by a rabbi between two children of immigrants, a Chinese Christian and an Iraqi Jew? Only in America such diversity is celebrated. Meeting in the synagogue further confirms that our country is rooted in respect and tolerance for all religious and ethnicities. Our intention for planning this debate was not only to provide a public service for our community, but also to emphasize the importance of our involvement in this electoral process. I know that there are many issues confronting our country today which require our attention. However, it is my hope that this debate will serve to highlight the importance of strong relationship between our country and the State of Israel. Further, we trust that once elected, either candidates will heed our message of concern with the divisive nature of partisan rivalry, in which adversely affects our future as Americans. I want to thank both candidates for being here tonight and acknowledge your great sacrifice while serving our country. My special thanks to Rabbi Wolpe for moderating this debate. I also want to thank and acknowledge the intelligent, thoughtful, and hardworking member of this committee. Carrie Lerman, David Matlub, Rick Richmond, Steve Surudi, David Kex, Ira Friedman, Shimon Ben Porat, Eric Diamond, and last but definitely not least, Michael Silverstein. I also want to acknowledge Judy Begin, the Assistant Executive Director, and Mr. Howard Lesner, our Executive Director, for their help for putting this event together. Our custodian, Jose Morales Eduardo Villatoro, thank you. and also our sound engineer, Jorge Garcia. Before we get started, I would like to go over some rules and format of our debate. Each candidate will be given 3 minutes for their opening statements. By a flip of a coin, it was determined that Mr. Carr to first start his opening statement. Rabbi Wolpe will be asking the candidate a series of questions which consist of domestic and foreign affair questions. The candidates have maximum of 2 minutes to answer. The candidates will be reminded in the front with there's a yellow and a red card. The yellow will remind you that there's 30 seconds left, and the red card would remind you that the time is up. At the end of their answers, the moderator, Rabbi Wolpe, has a chance to ask a follow-up question from either candidates. 1 minute is allowed for the candidates to respond to the follow-up questions. There are several questions which I've covered already, questions both in domestic and foreign affairs. Once Rabbi Wolpe has completed the period of questions and answers, the candidates are allowed 3 minutes to give their closing statements. And Mr. Carr will be giving his closing statement first, and State Senate Lieu will be giving his closing statement last. The audience are also encouraged to write their questions on an index card provided to you by Michael Silverstein. Actually, it would be a good time if anybody would like to get one. They could just raise their hand, and it would be good to have all your questions ready to go, because the moment Rabbi Wolpe finishes with the questions and answers of the candidates, then we would like to have the cards be brought forward so Rabbi Wolpe will review them and go through and ask other questions deemed necessary. Finally, I would like to make sure that everybody's cell phone is turned off. And also, and I know it may be hard to do, but I hope you do respect the fact that, there are obviously people that support either candidates, and we appreciate for both groups to be here. But please refrain yourself from any awkward reaction. No, hissing, awing, booing. I would appreciate that, and so this way we can start our debate. So I would like to ask State Senator Ted Lieu, and Mr. Elan Carr to join Rabbi Wolpe.
Just before we get started, in case you were wondering, yes, it was deliberate that I'm wearing a purple tie, because if you combine blue and red, what do you get? Therefore, I am the very image of neutrality up here, and hope to treat both candidates with equal both respect and toughness. That is actually the toughness of the men's club, because they were kind enough to help prepare questions, by which I mean to prepare questions. But we begin with opening statements from each of the candidates, so Mr. Carr, you're up first.
Thank you so much. Oh, is this on? Thank you so much, Mark, Carrie, Jan, of course, Rabbi Wolpe. It is an honor to be here. And for me, it's a double honor, because it wasn't too many years ago that I got married here at Sinai Temple. And so this is particularly a place that warms my heart. We have the reception here, the chuppah was in the sanctuary, and so After the debate, I just asked that we just dance the horror together, just so for nostalgia reasons. You know, talking about my marriage, we are in urgent times. And since that wonderful evening in Sinai, we have, thank God, several children, 3 kids. And I think every parent wants to hand over to their children, to the next generation, a community, a country, a world that is better. That is better and safer and more prosperous than the one we inherited. And my fear is that if we don't make the right decisions today to confront the urgent challenges we face, and I mean today, I don't mean in 10 years or in 5 years, I mean now, we will, God forbid, hand over to our kids in America, a world, in Israel that is weaker, less safe, less prosperous. And that's why I'm running for Congress. I'm a criminal gang prosecutor. I know about keeping people safe. And I spent a year leading an anti-terrorism in Iraq, and so I know how to keep people safe from threats from overseas. But safety doesn't just mean jail cells and handcuffs. It means we have to take care of our kids. It means we have to fix our inner cities. It means we have to have schools that nurture and empower children, safe schools and safe streets. And it means we need a growing economy that gives everyone a chance to succeed. Those are issues I imagine we'll be dealing with tonight. But there's another issue I want to open with, and that is Israel. One of the reasons I'm in this race is because Israel is exposed to greater dangers today than it has been in years. We just saw thousands of rockets fired into Israel. 100,000 missiles from Hezbollah are aimed at Israel from the north. And the big ticket item, the chief threat to peace and security in the world today, of course, is Iran, with its spinning centrifuges every day approaching nuclear breakout capability. And by the way, I'm an optimist, and you can fix a lot of things. But when Iran goes nuclear, that you can't fix. You can't take that one back. And so now is the time for us to stand up and make a difference for the future. And on the issue of the U.S.-Israel relationship, I won't just be a reliable vote in Congress. I will be someone who leads on U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East and on the U.S.-Israel relationship. Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here, and I look forward to the rest of the day.
Good evening. I am Senator Ted Lieu. I'm so honored to be here, and let me thank Rabbi Wolpe and your temple leadership for hosting this event. I want to thank my good friend Carr for inviting me. I had the honor of working with him at the law firm of Munger, Tolles & Olson. He is an amazing attorney and a fantastic person, and thank you, Carrie, for all that you do. So I'm going to talk to you about why I'm running for Congress, and then I want to talk to you about my leadership on Israel, and I look forward to answering any questions that you may have. The reason I'm running for Congress has to do with how I came here. Like millions of Americans, I am an immigrant. And I was thinking when my parents looked at a map of America, they could have picked beautiful Southern California or Hawaii. They picked Cleveland, Ohio. And that's where we grew up. And we were poor. We started off in the basement of a person's home. We did not speak English well. My parents went to flea markets and sold gifts and jewelry to make ends meet. They worked hard and eventually opened one gift and jewelry store in a shopping mall. My brother and I would help watch that store because we were free labor. And then eventually, they expanded to 6 stores. And in my mind, they achieved the American dream. They went from being poor to a home, gave my brother and I an amazing education. And it's one reason I joined the U.S. Air Force on active duty. I believe I can never give back to America everything this amazing country has given to my family. One reason I choose to remain in the reserves. I am a lieutenant colonel. I've been in now 19 years, and I'm at the Space and Missile Systems Center in Los Angeles Air Force Base. It's also one reason I'm in politics, make sure that this dream remains open for people who want to work hard and succeed. After active duty Air Force, I went to a law firm, Munger, Tolles & Olson. I then went to Fortune 500 financial services company. I was elected to Torrance City Council in 2002, the State Assembly in 2005, and the State Senate in 2011. Now, as you know, I am not Jewish. Nobody is perfect.
But it doesn't mean I haven't shown leadership on protecting Israel from the greatest threat it faces, which is a nuclearized Iran. 2007, I was a principal co-author of California's law to divest California's pension funds from Iran's nuclear and energy sectors. 2010, I was a co-author of California's law that told companies if they invest in Iran's energy sectors, they cannot contract with the state of California. And I was a co-author of a third law that was opposed by every insurance company that said to these insurance companies, if you invest in Iran's energy sectors, you cannot count that towards your capital market requirements. So I have shown leadership as a state legislator and in Congress, and I will continue to show leadership both in words and actions to protect Israel from its existential threats. Look forward to answering your questions tonight. Thank you.
As was mentioned by Mark Halusim, I have questions in both domestic and foreign affairs, and I think rather than do one consistently, I'm going to simulate the way the world actually works, and that is intersperse both domestic and foreign, because, as you know, issues don't come in neat packages. But I'll start off with a domestic affairs question, which is, everybody knows that the expansion of Social Security, Medicare, so on, takes the majority of the budget, and you can't, in fact, save the American budget simply by saying, I will cut out waste, because social entitlement programs comprise the vast majority of that pie. Some people think that that means that Social Security needs to be reformed or to be changed, that it is a sort of very sophisticated, non-deceptive, but nonetheless essential pyramid scheme, and that as the baby boom gets older, it's going to get harder and harder for America to maintain where it is. So if you agree with that analysis, what would you do about it? And if not, in what way is that analysis flawed? We start with you.
Yes, this is certainly a major problem, and the answer certainly is not giving our kids a mountain of debt so enormous that nothing they will be able to do can dig themselves out of it. And so what is the answer? Well, first of all, I'll say my wife is a doctor. She practices right here in the district, and she sees what's going on in our healthcare system all the time. We have got to lower healthcare costs. Instead, what's going on, premiums are going up, and access to care is going down. I think we need to have tort reform, and we need to have a system that lowers healthcare costs, because the number of unnecessary medical procedures that are ordered, which drains enormous resources out of our Medicare system, are done because of our tort climate. And California has a particularly difficult tort climate, both for the private sector and for medical practitioners. That's number one. Number two, and this touches on general budgetary issues, there is no substitute for economic growth. We want to have more revenue in the federal and state coffers. We have got to grow our economy. And now, year after year after year, we have a sluggish, anemic economy. Unemployment is still high. It's close to 8% in California. And our economic growth is very low. We cannot generate sufficient revenue, both to pay for Medicare and to fix our schools, which is a central issue in my campaign, and to invest in new technologies in California, and to keep people safe from threats overseas and threats at home. We're emptying our prisons, for example, in California, into our local communities, because there's no money. So we have got to grow our economy. At the end of the day, we will never have enough money to deliver the kind of services that the American people need unless we have economic growth. And that is a central issue for my campaign.
I oppose cuts to Medicare and Social Security. I would support looking at reductions in other areas of the budget, but not those two programs. I had the honor of working with Jewish Family Services for many years in the legislature. Last week I visited with them in their offices. Many of their constituents rely on these two programs to simply exist. These are extremely important programs for millions of Americans, and I would not cut any of those two programs. I do agree that growing the economy is simply the easiest way to make sure that these programs remain solvent, but if our economy does not continue to grow, then I would look at cuts in other areas.
Is the procedure now I ask a follow-up to that? Is that the... Yes. I can. So let me ask a follow-up to each side. To your side, yes, tort reform might help, but the increase in healthcare costs has to do with the increase in technology, the increase in ability to deliver services. People are living longer, and that's not going to change. So in fact, if healthcare costs are going to continue to increase, what do you do?
Well, they will continue to increase, and we need to have a growing budget that can accommodate increased expenditures in healthcare, and I would add increased expenditures in education and infrastructure and R&D and all of the other things we need to increase. But I just want to say something about tort reform. It's very important. We're not just talking about malpractice premiums going up. The problem is there are a tremendous number of tests that doctors feel compelled to order that are not necessary. And they're ordering these tests because they are afraid of being sued. And so it's not just the issue of malpractice insurance, it's also fewer procedures being ordered. And those procedures are a drain, if you're talking about Medicare patients, not private insurance patients, those procedures are a direct drain on the federal budget. And so I think tort reform is critical. And I hear this from doctors all over the state saying, I'm ordering x-rays and MRIs when I don't need to do these things. But I'm doing it because it's the standard practice because of the prospects of getting sued, and that's got to change.
And a quick follow-up, if you don't cut Medicare and Social Security, where actually do you cut? Can you name something specific that you would cut?
Sure, I agree with the Pentagon's proposal to reduce the size of our standing army and instead of focus on technology, which is what gives our military our edge, and that also happens to benefit this congressional district, which has a lot of aerospace and technological companies. And I do agree we need to lower healthcare costs. My brother is a doctor, my brother-in-law is a doctor, and they're just—
So you are Jewish?
My parents remind me every now and then my brother's a doctor.
One more, since we're on this subject, actually, and let me start with you. Do you support Obamacare? Do you think that it's working? Would you want to repeal it, replace it, reform it, leave it intact? Could you tell us specifically?
I support the Affordable Care Act, but clearly there are problems with it, and I would work to try to fix those problems. But let's try to understand what it is. It was not to solve healthcare problems. It was basically designed to give more health insurance coverage to more people. California disproportionately benefited from it. We had over 6 million uninsured. With one law, half of them got insured. That is a good thing. It also set up some incentives that have lowered healthcare costs in some areas. So for example, people are now going to be measured by, or hospitals, for example, by hospital readmission rates, which are very expensive and costly. And it's led to this interesting sort of entity where the Jewish Family Services is now leading this organization with 4 hospitals where when the patient gets discharged, they go ahead and visit with these patients, make sure they take their medication, make sure they follow their diet that they're being prescribed, and just doing simple follow-up, visiting their homes, making phone calls. They've reduced readmission rates in some of these hospitals by 40 to 50%. A huge savings in healthcare costs just with these 4 hospitals. If that could be replicated statewide, that would be a great thing.
How do you feel about the Affordable Care Act?
So I think, to be fair, the Affordable Care Act did not break our healthcare system in America, but it didn't fix it to the extent it needs to be fixed. Many things that are good about the Affordable Health Care Act, of course, kids being able to stay on their parents' insurance longer, pre-existing conditions and so on. But I gotta tell you, my wife, who practices medicine right here in this district, is on a daily basis seeing problems. Patients coming in saying, well, my insurance plan was canceled. I like my insurance plan, but it's no longer available. Well, I can't really get covered in California because I'm not eligible. Or other patients coming in saying, my internist, this is a big one, she hears constantly, my internist dropped insurance and has gone to an all-cash practice, and I like my doctor, but I can't afford my doctor anymore. This is a regular occurrence. And we can't have a system where reimbursement rates for doctors is going to continue to decline, and doctors are going to drop insurance, and we won't have access to health care. Or the vast majority of Americans won't. By the way, all the doctors around my wife's practice, most of them, have dropped insurance. And she said, I don't want to do that. I'm very proud of her. She said, you know, I didn't go to medical school to treat only rich people. I went to medical school to treat the community. But if this continues, I won't be able to pay the rent anymore. That has got to change. Now, I will say this. To introduce repeal bill after repeal bill after repeal bill is dead wrong. We need to propose smart solutions to keep all of the good things in the ACA, but then fix the other things. And we need to do this soon, because very shortly we're going to get into a spiral where not enough, as insurance premiums are going up, which they are, insurance premiums are going to go up, fewer and fewer young people are going to sign up for covered California, and these risk pools are going to become disastrously unaffordable. And so it's going to create a vicious circle where premiums are going to go up, fewer and fewer healthy people are going to sign up, the whole system will go bankrupt. Now the solution again is not to say, well, repeal, repeal, repeal. The solution is to fix it. And there are good things about it that we need to keep, but we need to fix the problems with it so that we have access, so that all Americans have access to the kind of health care they want and deserve.
Let me move to foreign policy, and I'll start, I think, with the most, right now, the most pressing and in some ways most difficult foreign policy challenge, which is not specifically Israel-Palestinian conflict or the Iranian nuclear conflict, both of which I will ask about, but let's begin with ISIS and what you do about the rise of fundamentalist violence that is fairly comprehensive and intolerant all across the Middle East, and seems to be a growing phenomenon in part because they're so effective recruiting people from places that would be improbable, from Western Europe, from America. What if you were in the president's shoes, what would you be doing now?
Yeah, and I would add, recruiting people also from American jails and prisons. I dealt with this as a prosecutor, and I see radicalization and recruitment within our custodial system, including in California. It's terrifying. This is especially painful for me because I led an anti-terrorism team in Iraq, and I've been to the places that have now fallen to ISIS. We heard about Mosul falling to ISIS in northern Iraq. I led anti-terrorism missions in Mosul. And so it's particularly painful to see the unraveling of large swaths of the Middle East. This was a grievous mistake. We left Iraq in the wrong way and at the wrong time. And we didn't help moderates in Syria when we should have helped moderates in Syria. And the results are that Iran became the dominant force in the Middle East, and the Sunnis became increasingly radicalized. If Iran were contained, the Sunnis would find these groups like al-Nusra and ISIS a lot less attractive. What would I do about it, your question? A few years ago, it was a tremendous achievement. Sunni tribal chiefs in Iraq were working together with the US military to fight Sunni terrorism. It was amazing. Sunni tribal chiefs were fighting Sunni terrorism only a few years ago. We need to reestablish those relationships immediately. Those were good relationships that brought a lot of stability and security to Iraq. We need to get back to that. And we need to do it right away. But I will say this. First of all, you said that the most vexing problem, at least. I actually don't think ISIS is the most vexing problem. I think Iran is the most vexing problem and the greatest danger. But also, in relation to your question directly, the Sunnis will never trust us enough to work with us unless they see a commitment to contain Iran. Because if Iran is not contained, no Sunni in Iraq or in Syria is going to partner with the United States to do anything. Their biggest fear is being dominated by the regional hegemon that has now emerged, and that is Iran, spinning its centrifuges every day, even as we sit here now. And so we have got to deal with the Iranian issue, and we have to stop their mischief in Iraq, which I directly experienced. By the way, I was shot at while I was in Iraq by Iranian proxies using Iranian weapons. And we have to stop the mass murder that they're committing currently in Syria. And only when we show the willingness to engage in the Middle East and contain Iran will the Sunnis trust us enough to reestablish those very demonstrably successful relationships that brought prosperity and peace to large sections of Iraq.
I would like to amend my adjectives. It's the most dramatic problem, but the most dangerous problem is Iran. Okay, I agree. Good, there we go. All right, and what would you do about the most dramatic problem in the Middle East?
Last week I attended an APAC event, and they were asked a very similar question, the greatest threat to Israel, and basically they said the first 10 were Iran, 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 Iran. And I bring that up to highlight this difference that it is true, ISIS is dramatic. They are very good at beheading people. Right? They behead not just Americans, they behead Lebanese soldiers, Syrians, Iraqis, anyone that is not of their sect. But if you read the articles and intelligence reports, they don't have the capacity to launch a nuclear missile anywhere. They don't have the capacity to strike the United States. And I think we have to be very careful about going there with a huge ground campaign, which I oppose. My view is we should work with a coalition of nations. We're much more threatened by them than the U.S. is. Have those nations who are around Iraq and Syria be much more engaged. Now, having said that, I do support the U.S. airstrikes to protect the Yazidis. And it's remarkable that the Yazidis were protected from genocide because of American air power. That is a remarkable thing. I also supported the U.S. airstrikes to protect the Kurds when ISIS may have overrun them. And as you may know, Iraqi Kurdistan and northern third of Iraq is relatively safe, relatively stable government. And right now, they're pushing back against ISIS in a very big way. And I support American air power to protect Iraq, working with the Kurds, working with the coalition to try to contain ISIS.
And would you ever support, and I'll ask this of both of you, but I'll start with you, would you ever support troops on the ground to fight ISIS?
No.
Would you?
I would not. We should not have left Iraq in the way we left Iraq. But now, in order to combat ISIS and also to stabilize Iraq, it would require a massive deployment of U.S. military power. I wouldn't do it. I don't agree with it. I don't think we should put boots on the ground. And I'll say this generally. American military force should be used not at all or to decisive effect. I learned that very clearly as a deployed military officer in a combat zone. And so I believe that unless U.S. military power is going to be deployed decisively, it shouldn't be used. I agree with airstrikes that are targeted to either help Yazidis in some cases, or Syrians in other cases, or to take out particular terrorist leaders, as President Obama has done on numerous occasions and have been very vocal about supporting them. But when the President of the United States says that his intent is to degrade and destroy ISIS, well, he better get it done. And the problem is when you make a statement like that, and then you don't deploy American military power to the extent that will achieve that result, it weakens the United States. Every bit as our missteps in Syria, talking about red lines and they're not doing anything about it. And so we've got to use military power either not at all or to the decisive effect for the mission defined. If it's to help Yazidis, that's great, but when we say that we're going to destroy a Middle East theater-wide threat, that would require the kind of deployment that I would not support at this stage.
Remember, if the red card, I know you do, but if the red card is held up and you go over, you lose the election. So we didn't talk. Mark didn't mention the consequences. He's a sweet guy, but I don't.
I'm going to be watching.
Right. So let's continue this thread a little bit because it's so important and so urgent. How do you feel? Let me ask you this way: do you feel as though we ought to have supported the rebels in Syria more, and if so, in what way? By airstrikes, by supplies, by troops?
Hindsight is 20/20. If America 2 years ago decided to support the moderate Syrian rebels, maybe we would not be in the circumstance we are today. But that didn't happen. So what we have now is America deciding to support so-called moderate Syrian rebels when they're weaker than they were 2 years ago, when they were only fighting one enemy, Assad. Now we told them, let's go ahead and fight two enemies. We want you to fight Assad and ISIS. And by the way, when you weaken one, you strengthen the other. So it's a very strange mission we're giving them. Our track record of training and arming other soldiers has been poor. We spent over $1 billion training and arming Iraqi soldiers, and what happens? They run. So now the enemy has our weapons, and we're using American air power to destroy American Humvees that ISIS has. Really stupid. So my fear is not so much strategic as just tactical. I don't think this is a high probability of success of having moderate Syrian rebels, to the extent you can even vet them and find them, of them actually winning. Again, I think we need to get the coalition of nations around that area to get much more engaged. It is good that the UAE, for example, has launched airstrikes in that area, led, by the way, by a female fighter pilot. And we're getting more cooperation from the other nations there. And I think that's how we contain ISIS. And that's what I will continue supporting.
Look, I think it was disastrously short-sighted to disengage from Syria and not to support the moderate opposition to Assad. There was a moderate opposition to Assad. The United States abandoned that opposition despite the use of chemical weapons by the regime. And what you have then was the radicalization of the Sunni opposition. And so the Sunni opposition has now gone to Al-Nusra and ISIS and various cousins of the same basic family. And that's the situation we're in today. Now we're in the situation. Now we face the contrast of actually doing Hezbollah's work in Syria. By going against radical Sunnis, we are in effect clearing away the opposition to Hezbollah, which is called by Israel the best trained Arab army in the Middle East and the chief threat to its security on its borders. This was a tragic error, and we made the exact same error. So hindsight might be 20/20, but we then made the exact same error in Iraq when we disengaged with Iraq after seeing that, and the exact same thing happened in Iraq as the Sunnis became radicalized. What we need to do is lead. It's very simple. When the United States doesn't lead, the void is filled by the enemies of civilization. We see that in many parts of the world. We see that in the way that Ukraine has been threatened. We have got to lead. And only by leading overseas can the United States protect our interests even here at home.
Let me challenge you on that statement and then come back to you. The last time the United States decisively led was when George W. Bush started a war in Iraq. Did you support that war? Do you support it retrospectively? And do you think the effects were good?
I did support the war. I do support it retrospectively in its inception, but not in the way that it was prosecuted. And by the way, when I was in Iraq, I publicly took issue. And I took issue with senior commanders in terms of what we were doing and how we were doing it. We allowed this to drag on for way longer. We didn't have enough troops, and we didn't deal the coup d'etat to the Sunni insurgency when we could have in Fallujah, and I was there at the time. In April of 2004, when we could have finished the insurgency in Fallujah, and Paul Bremer pulled back all of the Marines from Fallujah, and that's when the suicide bombings started happening everywhere in Iraq. So it was prosecuted in the wrong way. But it's very, very important that the United States lead, even short of going to war. Leadership doesn't mean that you have to necessarily invade a country. I said before that I wouldn't support returning to Iraq. I wouldn't have left the way we left. I don't want to lose the election. Well, I wouldn't have left the way we left. I would not return to Iraq now, but leadership doesn't require returning to Iraq.
Did you support the war at the time? Do you support it retroactively?
So I'm going to let you know how I think about American foreign policy. Having been in the Air Force now for 19 years, it's very clear to me we have an incredible military. We're very good at defeating enemy militaries, at blowing things up, taking over territory. But America traditionally has been bad at answering the next question, which is, what do you do next? So for example, in Libya, we took out Gaddafi. Now there is more chaos, more people dying, even though Gaddafi did not have any real evidence that he was going to strike the United States. In Iraq, we took out Saddam Hussein, an evil, brutal dictator. But there was very little evidence he was going to strike the U.S., no evidence that he has nuclear weapons. I actually agree with the first President Bush. You should read his memoirs, where he explains why he did not go in and take out Saddam Hussein when he was 45 minutes away from Baghdad in Desert Storm, because he couldn't answer that next question. What do I do with this power vacuum? Unfortunately, his son did not have the same views, and Dick Cheney, for example, just had the wrong view. He thought that Americans would be welcomed with roses after we liberated Iraq. That just did not happen. So if we don't have a very good answer to the what's next question, I am very skeptical of American military intervention. One of the things that is inspiring, and we heard in the introduction, is the immigrant history of virtually everybody in this room. All of us included. And that's what makes it so
paradoxical and in a way painful that America struggles with immigration today so much. So let me ask you, do you back increasing quotas on admitting skilled workers into the country? And if so, specifically, what would you propose?
Absolutely. I believe we should increase the number of H-1B visas to allow the companies in the U.S. who can't fill their open positions with these highly skilled workers to be able to do so. I support the U.S. Senate's version of comprehensive immigration reform. It has several elements. First of all, it increases border security. I believe as a sovereign nation, we have the right to control our borders, and we need to increase security to make sure, not only for our protection, but also to dissuade people from entering illegally. I support a pathway to citizenship, which is also in that package, and increasing the number of skilled workers coming into the United States. And that is the Senate's version. It's now in the House of Representatives. As a member of Congress, I would fight every day to make sure that that gets passed off the House floor.
I would make a guest worker program part of a whole immigration reform package that we need to get done. You know, there is nothing that points more clearly to the dysfunction in Congress, the disgraceful hyper-partisanship in Washington, D.C., than its inability to solve this problem. And so we have got to have immigration reform. We have to secure our borders, first of all, because border security has nothing to do with immigration. This thing has been politicized. Border security is a public safety issue, not an immigration issue. I'm the son of immigrants. Border security is a public safety issue. I'll tell you something, I had to put my campaign on hold 2 months ago, stop my campaign to prosecute a murder. The defendant I prosecuted 2 months ago had been deported, came back to this country, shot the victim twice in the face. A year ago, I prosecuted a young man for attacking a cop while threatening to murder him, and while claiming a gang, by the way. That young man had been deported 7 times, 7. And so we have got to secure our borders to keep American families safe, including immigrants, who, by the way, are the recipients of violence more than anyone else. And my fear is not only crime, but that the next, God forbid, mass casualty terrorist attack is going to walk across our border. We've got to secure our borders. We have to have a guest worker program so that employees can come into the country, skilled and unskilled, under permit and work. That would help grow the economy in California and help businesses here. And third of all, we've got to have a pathway to legalized status for the many undocumented residents who are here, who are law-abiding, decent, patriotic people. I told 2 bad stories. I'll tell you a quick one, because I think the card is coming up. An illegal family came into this country. When their son, they were homeless. When their son turned 17, they signed him up to be a Marine, because they said, this country gave us a chance at a life, you're gonna pay it back. That Marine just retired a year ago as a US Army officer. He trained me in the Army. He was my mentor. And so we have to have a pathway to legalized status for undocumented residents who are law-abiding.
As long as we're talking about violence, how do you feel about gun control?
So the Supreme Court has spoken that the Second Amendment encompasses and defines a private right to bear arms. However, just like with the First Amendment, there are reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions on the First Amendment for the sake of public safety. I believe that it is not a contradiction of the Supreme Court's opinion with regard to the Second Amendment to say that there are reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions on the Second Amendment. What would those restrictions be? Well, I would say, number one, a reasonable waiting period for full background investigation, including criminal background checks and mental health checks. Number 2, universal registration of firearms so they can be tracked. And number 3, training requirements. I see nothing wrong with that. I don't think that contradicts the Second Amendment. As long as a waiting period is punitive, I think that is entirely in keeping with the Supreme Court's opinion on the Second Amendment. And so I favor smart regulations that keep American families safe.
Thank you. I always like when this question is asked because I get to brag and say that I've received the Air Force Marksmanship Award twice. Now, having said that, I do support gun control measures. I believe we should have a background check at the federal level, the same that we have in California. I support a ban on assault weapons. I don't believe the Second Amendment was ever interpreted back then to have a view of someone who had a weapon that could kill dozens and dozens of people in a few seconds. So I do support a ban on assault weapons, and I believe that if you could do more to also educate people on how to use guns so that they don't inadvertently shoot someone, or they don't have their kids accidentally take a gun and shoot someone, that would also be beneficial. And so I do support those measures.
I understand that the best way to approach this question is to prevent it from happening. But let's say that with all the best intentions, it doesn't get prevented, and Iran says, by the way, guys, in an hour we're going to have a nuclear weapon. Do you bomb?
If Iran said that, I believe that the next minute Israel would bomb. And I believe America should support Israel's right to self-defense, Israel's right to protect itself from existential threats, and I believe America must never waver in our protection and defense of Israel.
And if Israel couldn't bomb, would you bomb?
I don't know why Israel couldn't bomb. They would.
Well, let's say Israel turns to the United States and says, we want your logistical and military help in bombing the reactor. Think about that. Would you bomb?
Yes, and if...
As in the United States,
yes,
from the United States.
Yes, and if Israel did not have the bunker buster technologies, which I think was the heart of your question, to penetrate, for example, the Fordo reactor that's deep inside of a mountain, the answer is absolutely yes. Iran is a threat to peace and security in the world, not only to Israel. It's an immediate threat to Israel, but it's a threat to us as well. In addition to its nuclear weapons capability that it's approaching, Iran is working on an ICBM program. Intercontinental ballistic missiles aren't for Israel. They have had missiles for a long time now that can hit Israel. They aren't for Europe. ICBMs are missiles that go into low orbit so that they can travel halfway around the Earth. And no country builds ICBMs for conventional weapons. ICBMs are built to carry nuclear payloads halfway around the Earth. So yes, I think at all costs, the United States must prevent Iran from acquiring, and I would say even further approaching, a nuclear weapons capability. Should Israel take it upon itself to attack Iran, to destroy those capabilities, the United States should declare publicly its unequivocal support for Israel, should supply Israel with any and all material it would need to conduct its operation decisively, and veto any condemnatory resolutions, the inevitable condemnatory resolutions of the UN Security Council.
And in addition to answering if Israel couldn't or didn't have the technology, I'd also like to know, do you support the administration's current track towards negotiations and the way that it's conducting the negotiations?
If Israel requested American assistance, I would support that. In terms of the current negotiations with Iran, I don't have the conceptual objection to trying to bring Iran into the mainstream and to have them turn their nuclear weapon program into purely civilian uses. But having been in the military now 19 years, I don't trust Iran, we can't trust Iran. And my view is countries respond to basically force or threat of force or sanctions or threat of sanctions. And treaties should only be entered into and agreements entered into if we can verify them, if we can make sure that a country is complying with those objectives, and if we can, then we should not enter into those agreements. It is also my view that Iran has way too many centrifuges for a purely civilian use. I would require Iran to destroy most of their centrifuges or give that up in order for the U.S. to enter into any sort of agreement to make Iran's nuclear program purely civilian.
Talk of bringing Iran into the mainstream scares me, because there is nothing mainstream about that country. And in fact, one centrifuge is too many centrifuges for Iran. There is no right to enrich uranium. There's a very simple solution for a country that wants to have a civilian nuclear program that was proposed to Iran. They rejected it. And that is that nuclear fuel is delivered to the country under supervision. They can run a reactor, and then spent fuel is taken out of the country without enrichment. There's no right to spin centrifuges and enrich uranium. And so I think that this effort is clearly, when you look at Iran's missile programs as well, and when you look at Iran's technology also to link fission devices so that they can actually build a hydrogen bomb, all of this is very clear. This is not a civilian nuclear program. I'll also note that Elan is one of the world's leading exporters of oil. They're not pining for civilian energy in the country, and so this is clearly a military program. Iran must not be allowed to enrich uranium.
So let me ask you about economic growth. Both of you have spoken about economic growth. Give me two things that you would do that would stimulate the economy that as a congressperson you would support.
So first of all, we have to have a tax system that makes sense. Part of that is California, part of that is federal. Let me give you an example. A friend of mine is a CEO of a biomedical company. He's going to build a biomedical device manufacturing plant, wanted to put it here, but he put it in Ottawa. The reason why he put it in Ottawa is because here we have a tax on biomedical devices, special tax on biomedical devices. We are driving our job creators out of California and in many cases out of the country. Number one. Number two, we have to have a tax system that incentivizes companies, rather than sending their money offshore, bringing their offshore profits back into this country for investment. Currently, our tax system punishes companies from doing that, and there are hundreds of billions of dollars in profits outside of the United States that could be brought back into our economy. And so we have to do that. But third of all, it's about regulations. It's not just a tax issue. We are suffocating the life out of our private sector. And California does that better than anybody. We are sending our job creators out of town to Texas and Nevada and Arizona and Louisiana and Canada, and they're leaving. The automotive industry has left Torrance. Hollywood is shooting in Louisiana and Georgia and Canada. High tech is leaving. My goodness, even high tech is looking to leave California, in many cases leaving. We've got to stop the bleeding. Between CEQA and the labor laws in California and the tort climate in California, we are suffocating our private sector. And the only way that we are going to get our economy on track and have economic growth, the level of economic growth that our kids deserve to have, and to bring employment down, is to have a tax and regulatory infrastructure that makes sense and that encourages economic growth and job creation and the private sector to start, especially small businesses, to start here and grow here. That has got to be done immediately, before it's too late.
There's perception and then there are facts. So let me just give you some facts. A few months ago, we passed an on-time balanced budget, over $2 billion in reserves. We paid down over $12 billion of state debt. We'll largely be debt-free by 2020. We reinvested over $10 billion in education. We have now recovered all the jobs lost since the recession. This past year, California outpaced the national average in job growth. In August, the last month of which we have data, California created more jobs than any other state in the union. My view of how we continue to grow this economy is focusing on our competitive advantages, things we can do better than other states or other nations. That's why I voted for and supported, and the governor signed, an aerospace tax credit. That's basically going to guarantee the Air Force's next generation bomber will be built in California. I was a co-author of the film and TV production tax credit expansion. We have an amazingly robust entertainment sector, but we're losing jobs to other states and other countries. We have now expanded the tax credit from $100 million over 2 years to $330 million per year for 5 years. It's a huge investment, as we know with every film and TV production kept in California, we have ripple effects such as caterers and restaurants and dry cleaners that also benefit. We also have ports, right? Switzerland's never going to have a port. And if we can incentivize these industries, that's how we succeed, and that's what we've done in California. As a member of Congress, that's what I will continue to do.
Want to take an extra? Okay. Let me piggyback on that question and ask if there was one and only one change that you could make to the current income tax, what would it be? All right, let's start with you.
I would close the corporate diversion loophole.
Do you want to say any more about that?
So companies are now going overseas, simply moving their headquarters, not their operations, and then taking this loophole where they're not basically paying U.S. taxes. I would close that.
I would simplify the tax code dramatically and make it...
Is that one change?
Yeah. Well, no. No, I would simplify it. I would make it fairer, simpler, easier to understand and flatter. But let me say, in relation to that question, we have we have, in terms of the California budget, I don't think anyone thinks that education is funded enough in California, K through 12. We're gutting the UC system in terms of budget. We're emptying our prisons into our local communities. I don't know if you know this, but I cannot send a felon, unless it's a strike offense or a sex crime, I cannot send felons to state prison anymore. Not allowed, because there's no room. And so there's a new law that says they can't go to prison. Felons can't go to prison. So we see an increase in crime. And so I don't think anyone really thinks California is doing well with nearly 8% unemployment, youth unemployment that's double that, minority unemployment that's catastrophic, and the lack of funding, the lack of availability of funds to do the many things that we need to do to provide services to the people of California. And only a growing economy will take care of that.
I'm going to ask you two more questions, and then we'll take questions from the audience. First of all, in foreign policy, I'm going to read it just as the Men's Club provided it. In your view, what has been the primary cause of the repeated failure of the peace process between Israel and the Palestinians? What steps would you encourage Israel to take at this point? What steps would you say the Palestinians must take?
The repeated failures of the peace process are because the Palestinians have not come to terms with the existence of a Jewish sovereign entity in the land of Israel. And until the Palestinians come to terms with that, there won't be a peace process. There might be a process, but there won't be a healthy process, and there certainly won't be a deal. You know, when an entire people define themselves through the Nakba, and that is their national identity, the Nakba, this great disaster that they commemorate, which is what? Israel's founding. How are you really going to sit down and have a deal that involves an end of the conflict and a recognition of Israel? What should Israel do? First of all, it should insist on the truth. The truth. You can't negotiate in fairy tale land. Whenever the terms of the negotiations don't acknowledge Israel's eternal connection to the land, Israel's history in that land, Israel needs to stop and say, we will not negotiate under those terms. We will not negotiate under terms that don't recognize that Israel has a long, long history in that land. The fact of the matter is that Palestinians need to understand that there are two peoples with competing claims on Judea and Samaria. That's the truth. And until the Palestinians say, we have a claim on Judea and Samaria, and the Israelis have a claim on Judea and Samaria, and they're competing claims, and we've got to sit down and negotiate those claims, we're never going to get a deal. Now, what is the short-term, what would I say should be the short-term solution? Rather than insist on a comprehensive solution to all of the issues, which has proved elusive, tragically elusive. I would love to have peace, but it's proven tragically elusive. We need to have smaller deals that manage the relationship between Israel and the Palestinians. Smaller deals that involve water and security and roadways, so that the relationship manages on a daily basis and it's easier for Israel and Palestinians to live. That will make peace more possible in the long term.
I support a two-state solution. I believe that's how you eventually will get lasting peace in the region. And to me, the greatest obstacle to that is Hamas. As you know, Hamas's charter doesn't just call for the destruction of Israel, it calls for the killing of all Jews. And you can't deal with an entity who's launching 3,000 rockets at you and digging tunnels into your territory. And so until Hamas is either taken out, or they reverse their charter, or Fatah takes over, I don't think you can get to that two-state solution. And as long as they're in place, we're not going to see peace in the region. So I would support any efforts to take Hamas out, or at least to get them to be taken out by their own people. Until that happens, it's very hard to get to a two-state solution. But eventually, I think that's what's going to happen if you want lasting peace in the region.
Do you, as a follow-up question to each of you, I'll put to you first, do you think that the government's building housing in East Jerusalem or people expanding settlements in Judea, Samaria, or the territories, however one chooses to call them, do you think that that's productive of peace?
By the way, because of the way you phrased the question, I don't call them Judea and Samaria because I don't favor territorial concessions. I call them Judea and Samaria to acknowledge historical connection.
But the question, because we only have 30 seconds left.
So the question is that we, settlements have never been an obstacle to peace in the region. We had settlements in Yamit, we gave back to Sinai. We had settlements in Gaza, we gave back Gaza, we unilaterally disengaged from Gaza and cleared out the settlements. By the way, we didn't get peace from that, if you hadn't noticed. There are settlements in Judea and Samaria. We offered the Palestinians 97% of Judea and Samaria settlement free. What did we get back? The answer was no. Settlements are not an obstacle to peace.
I believe settlements, or they're a symptom of the problem, they're not a cause. And the cause of the problem is there's not well-defined borders. A two-state solution would fix that. And again, that's how we get lasting peace in the region.
Last question before we take questions from the audience. That is, we've talked about guns and violence in prison. We incarcerate a much larger percentage of our population than any other nation in the world, or for that matter, probably in history. Why are we so bad at creating? Why do we imprison so many people?
So there's two things going on in that question. One is we have an incredibly high recidivism rate in California. It is 63.7%. That means for every 1,000 state prisoners we release, 637 commit more crimes and go back to state prison. Really stupid. One reason that happens is we have very little recidivism reduction programs. And that's something I've been working on to increase recidivism reduction programs in state prison. I'm pleased that in this past budget we did increase the allocation to recidivism reduction programs, and that's how we fix that problem. There's also a lot of folks going to state prison who did not commit violent crimes. So we fixed some of that, and we have those folks going to county jails. But really, to me, it is, because no matter where you stand on this issue, I think we all agree that the one thing the prisoner has is a lot of time. And if you could just teach them something while they're in prison, whether it's a degree or a skill or something that could give them a shot at getting a job when they leave, you'll reduce recidivism, you'll naturally reduce our prison population.
80% of the violence in Los Angeles is gang-related. I'm a gang prosecutor. You know why Kid joins a gang? And I prosecute kids, let me tell you, 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old kids. A kid joins a gang because he's looking for self-respect. He's looking for peer acceptance. He wants to feel love and importance. That's why a kid joins a gang. Well, what kid doesn't want that? Shouldn't we be providing healthy vehicles? Why should a kid find self-respect and love and self-worth from MS-13 and 18th Street and Hoover Criminals and the neighborhood groups, all the other horrendous organizations I prosecute regularly? We need to have healthy vehicles that engage our kids. That's the problem. We are not nurturing kids in far too many communities. Our schools are broken, and our kids are left not nurtured and not educated, not taken care of. Illiteracy rates, my goodness, in the United States, illiteracy rates are high in many of our communities. So we've got to fix our inner cities. We've got to have schools that are safe and disciplined, but also that nurture our kids and empower our kids. Give a child a taste of their unlimited potential in the world. That's the way we stop crime. The only way to stop crime is to prevent crime in the first place, by having nurturing environments for kids and an economy that gives everyone a chance to succeed.
Would you legalize marijuana? This is a follow-up question on violence.
I think it is incredibly dumb that the federal government criminalizes marijuana. Our U.S. attorneys and FBI agents have far better things to do than going after marijuana. So I would decriminalize it if I could as a member of Congress.
No, I wouldn't. I actually am familiar with two particular cases as examples as a prosecutor. One case, one of these completely legal marijuana dispensaries, many of them are fronts for gangs. One of them was, the name of the place was SL Caregivers. SL was Shoreline Crips. It was in the name on the store. The gang was in the name of the store. It's unbelievable. A case I just prosecuted. I just sent someone away for 21 years. One of these dispensaries, they were, in addition to selling marijuana legally, were dealing coke. And so two people, they owed money. Three people came in, including the defendant I prosecuted. By the way, the two others are at large. And they shot the place up. One person is blind for life, the other person is paralyzed for life. And I prosecuted one of those defendants. These marijuana stores, which is what they are centers for criminal activity and gang activity. I believe in compassionate use, and I would certainly have ways of delivering that, but not through these stores, retail stores for pot.
If you're elected as a congressman, would you ask the U.S. Muslim leadership to modernize the definition of jihad in the 21st century? And if the answer is yes, how would you do that?
I will tell you, in addition to supporting Israel in a very public way through my AIPAC involvement, I've spent the last several years as the international president of AIPAI training campus leaders to stand up and fight. You talk about jihad, I'll tell you, jihad is the BDS movement on campus, where you've got violent anti-Israel activity that is threatening Jewish students on college campuses across America. I'm very proud that over the past few years, I've spent a lot of time training pro-Israel leaders on college campuses to stand up and defend American and Jewish values on college campuses. And so yes, I think the definition of jihad should include virulently anti-Semitic movements on college campuses, including the BDS movement.
I agree with Elan, and I believe the BDS movement is offensive and factually wrong. And as a member of the state legislature, I was one of the co-authors of a letter to the University of California asking them to do more to stop the BDS movement on their campuses. Just a couple months ago, I wrote a letter to the International Longshore Workers Union thanking them because there were BDS protesters at the ports of Long Beach and LA that were trying to stop the unloading of an Israeli flag vessel. The longshore workers unloaded the vessel despite the protests, and I stood up with them, and I believe we need to continue fighting against the BDS movement. And as a member of Congress, I'll continue to speak out on that issue. Earlier this year, I went to the AIPAC dinner in Los Angeles, and some of you may have won. It was very interesting because, as you know, these are long dinners, and about 2/3 of the way into it, I realized that none of the speakers were Jewish. And then finally, Elliot Brand goes up, the then Western Regional Director, and he basically says that AIPAC doesn't lose sleep at night today over America's support for Israel. AIPAC loses sleep at night, what about 30 years from now? Where will America's support for Israel be? And keep in mind, 30 years from now, you've got these college students that are going through and seeing this BDS movement. And that's what we need to fight against, to make sure that America's support for Israel is as strong today as it is 30 years from now when we've got a changing demographic.
This is particularly a question to you, State Senator Lieu. A couple of people have asked about your receipt of an award from Carr, the Muslim Foundation. Would you speak to that?
Sure.
Why you decided to accept that, and how do you view the organization?
2.5 years ago, I was a co-author of Assembly Bill in 1964. That was a bill on religious freedom. It said that employers cannot discriminate against employees based on their religious dress, such as if you wore a headscarf or a turban or a yarmulke. So it is true that Carr supported this bill, as did the Anti-Defamation League and the American Jewish Committee. And the bill was signed into law. I was very proud to have championed that bill. And I did get an award for supporting religious freedom in California, and that's why I got the award. I do find it incredibly, deeply offensive that I am being attacked for supporting the religious freedom of California.
And for you, if your Democratic district felt one way about an issue and the Republican caucus voted another way, which would you feel is your greater obligation to support?
Oh, I've said very publicly that I'm running to fight for the issues I believe in. My whole campaign has been about bipartisanship, about reaching across the aisle, compromising, and bringing people together for the sake of a better future for all Americans. My campaign has never been about party or labels. And the LA Times asked me about this, and they said, well, you know, you're talking dangerously here. You know, you might not get your choice committee assignments talking like that. I looked them straight in the eye and I said, I don't care if my committee assignments are to clean bathrooms. I'm running for Congress so that I can go make a difference for the issues I care about, for safer streets and better schools and a growing economy and American leadership overseas. And so I'm going to stand up for what I believe in, regardless of what the party wants.
How do you feel about fracking?
So I tell you,
it was a natural transition. You didn't see that?
Yes. Sharp transition. I believe that the path to energy independence, and energy independence is very, very critical. And what the amount of revenue that's going into the pocket of terrorists because of increased oil prices in the Middle East is just staggering. The way to do that is investing in alternative energy sources, in green energy, and biodiesel, and there's wonderful technology. But we also have to explore our resources here. Now, I would never support the exploration of our fossil fuels in a way that would damage the environment. But to the extent that we can do so safely, of course we should do so safely. Now, with all kinds of techniques, slant drilling and all kinds of other techniques, there is a way to explore natural resources in a way that's safe and protects the environment. And to the extent that that can be done, of course we should do it. But if we're going to jeopardize the environment, we shouldn't do it. And so any particular project, like in so many projects we have in California, you have to do an environmental impact statement and a study, and then make the best decisions based on the data.
Fracking. I oppose fracking. I was a co-author of a bill in the state Senate this year that would put a moratorium on fracking until we could learn more about what fracking actually does. We have found out recently that we know it causes earthquakes in other parts of America. I think it's insane to now do this at a mass basis in California since, every now and then we have an earthquake. We're also injecting chemicals through the fracking process. Some of that may leach into our water table. We don't really know how dangerous this can be until we find out more about it. I would put a moratorium on it. I also oppose what's going on in Hermosa Beach, which is a proposal to do slant drilling for offshore oil drilling. I oppose offshore oil drilling along the coast. I oppose the proposal in Hermosa Beach to do oil drilling. And I don't support either fracking or offshore oil drilling.
I have two more questions, and then we'll take final statements. Do you support raising the minimum wage?
I do. There have been 64 studies that show increase in the minimum wage actually increases the economy. When President Clinton increased the minimum wage, that actually helped the economy. And this year, over 600 economists, including 7 Nobel laureates, wrote a letter saying we should increase the federal minimum wage to $10.10. And as a member of Congress, I would fight to increase the federal minimum wage to $10.10.
I believe income disparities are a problem for all Americans and a challenge. How do you fix that? You fix that by having economic growth and reducing unemployment and raising the level for all Americans by having a growing economy that welcomes our kids into the workforce. That's not happening now. It's a remarkable statistic that 55%, and you have to sit back, 55% of American college graduates today are either unemployed or underemployed. That's staggering. And when you think about the mounting debt college students have today, it's oppressive. So how do you fix it? Again, a growing economy. My fear is that if we raise the minimum wage now, when our economy is as anemic as it is, we're gonna drive more people into unemployment. Fewer job creators will be able to hire. Companies will not be able to expand their workforces. And we will have greater unemployment and greater underemployment. When, like I just said, we already have unemployment and underemployment in numbers that are too high. And so, like I said before, we have got to grow our economy. That is the solution for income disparities, and it's the solution for unemployment, and it's the solution for revenue to the federal and to the state treasuries.
Do you believe that climate change is a threat? And if so, what steps would you take to ameliorate that threat?
I certainly do. I actually said so to the LA Times, and the LA Times has twice now noted that I have an excellent environmental record. And so I'm very proud that the LA Times called me pro-environment, because I am pro-environment. But that doesn't mean that I'm anti-business. By the way, I've yet to meet an environmentalist who doesn't want a good job at a good wage. And I've yet to meet a business leader who doesn't want to breathe clean air and drink clean water. And so we've got to come together on these issues and make the world a better place. So yes, I believe in climate change. What I would do is I would take steps to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But that has got to be done through an international consortium. This notion that you can burden American businesses, or not even American businesses, you can burden California alone, and then allow China to dump pollutants on mass amounts of pollutants into the atmosphere, and then think that the world is going to be a better place environmentally is simply absolutely wrong. What we're going to do is kill our economy and not solve the problem. I believe in solving problems, and solving problems mean you have to have an agreement, an international agreement that includes China and India, where greenhouse gas emissions will be reduced for the sake of a better environment throughout the world.
I believe climate change is the greatest long-term threat facing not just America, but humanity. One of the reasons I'm running for Congress is because I want my 2 children, who are 8 and 11, when they grow up, to live. I want their kids to be able to live. And climate change is causing not just problems with water supply, it's also, over long term, going to cause problems with the food supply that leads to violent conflict. And so this is one of the most pressing issues facing America. I was a co-author of Assembly Bill 32 in California, which set up a state cap-and-trade system. And as a member of Congress, I would reintroduce the Waxman-Markey climate change bill, which will set up a national cap-and-trade system. And I believe to tackle this, you need America to do what California has done, and then the rest of the world to follow and do what California has done. And that's how we address this issue. And because I do have not just taken action on climate change, but have a plan on how to try to tackle it, it is one reason the Los Angeles Times endorsed me for this election. And I also do want to note that the way I think about the environment and about climate change can be summed up in this Native American quote that I'm very fond of. It basically says that we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. And I want the environment to be as good for them when they grow up as it is for us now.
And now, closing statements. I believe we begin with you, Mr. Carr.
Should I get it?
Yeah, sure.
Well, thank you so much to Rabbi Wolpe, to Sinai, to all of you for making this happen. We talked about a number of issues that are deeply important. We talked about healthcare, we talked about immigration, we talked about our economy, we talked about education. And for all of these problems confronting American families, real problems, we look to our nation's capital in the frail hope of finding extrication. And what we see is hopeless gridlock, hyper-partisanship, and an inability to come together on seeming anything to move our country forward. This is a danger for our future, which is why my campaign from the beginning has been about bipartisanship. My opponent closed the last several debates by talking about the differences between us and saying, well, I'm going to caucus with the Democrats. Let me tell you, I'm going to do what's right. My campaign is about doing what's right. It's about reaching across the aisle, compromising, and crafting real solutions to real problems confronting American families. We have got to do that together, because we're all in this together. The reason why so many Democrats are supporting my campaign, and by the way, we just launched a Democrats for Carr website where Democrats, not only registered Democrats, lifelong registered Democrats, but titled involved Democrats, people who in one case, former mayors, people who have been on the platform committee of the Democratic Party, the platform committee, former president of Democratic clubs in college, they're on my team because they are sick and tired of the hyper-partisanship that suffocates our nation's capital. And they want to look past party. And they're asking which candidates, plural, because it's not just this race, candidates, which candidates are going to fight for me? Which candidates are going to look past party and come up with real solutions to our problems? I talked about my wife earlier, who's a doctor who practices in this district. My wife is a lifelong Democrat. She's proud to be a lifelong Democrat. You know, we agree on 95% of the issues because we have oceans of common ground between us. And so our future as a country depends on us coming together and putting aside partisanship and asking how we can help make our world a better place. Because our children deserve to inherit a strong, successful, prosperous America. And they deserve to inherit a safe, secure, and prosperous Israel. And for that to happen, we have got to make the decisions today that will promise that future for them. And those decisions have got to be made together. All of us together, because we are all in this together. It's our country, it's our future. And the time has come now to bring that kind of change to our nation's capital. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi Wolpe, for your excellent moderation of this debate, and thank you, Carrie, again, for inviting me. And this is our second to last debate. Elan and I have been through about 50 of these. I'm almost sad that I won't be able to have any more. And it's been a pleasure to be with you tonight. And I thought I'd just conclusion up by telling you about my trip to Israel that I took in 2007 with my wife. And we didn't know what to expect. And in fact, what I expected was just the images I'd seen on TV. And when we got there, there was this big demonstration at the airport. And my wife and I thought, oh, there's this big national security thing going on. As we get closer, we realized it's a teacher's strike. I'm like, oh, it's the same the whole world over. And they took us to Jerusalem. And we visited the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I happen to be Catholic. It's incredibly important to Catholics. We saw the wall, and we also saw the Dome of the Rock. And all of this was within walking distance of each other, three major religions. And I instantly understood why there's been centuries of conflict. And I also saw the promise of Israel, which is you had very different religions living there peacefully. They then took us to the Ashkelon Sarau area, where we went to this military outpost. And I remember going to the second floor of this military tower, and the IDF soldier was explaining to us that there is Gaza in the distance. Israel provides most of the power to Gaza, and they launch rockets over it. Made no sense to me. And as the IDF soldier is giving his briefing, a younger one comes up the stairs, and then he engages the older one, and they have this pretty heated conversation. Then the young one leaves. About 5 minutes later, our briefing ends. We get back on the bus. And I asked the guy, I said, what is that all about? And he said, the younger soldier told the older one, will you please take these people out of here? They're making us targets. And you could see in the sky the metallic balloon-like things I've warned about rocket attacks. And it was a transformative experience for me to be there, to see the resiliency of the people, to see that folks are going to worship, they're taking their kids to school, they're playing, they're shopping, and at any moment a rocket could come over and kill them. And I also understood how close Israel's enemies were, and as a result of both my academic studies, having been in the military, and having gone through that trip, it's just very clear to me that America must always do what it can and must do to protect Israel and her security, that America can never waver in our support of Israel, that Israel has an absolute right to self-defense, the right to not have thousands of rockets launched against it, the right to not have tunnels dug on its territories. And as a member of Congress, I will be a leader in protecting Israel and her security. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and good night.
One thing.
But don't leave yet, because...
Don't leave yet. You should leave yet.
I shouldn't leave yet.
Yeah, I got something to say about you as well. First of all, I want to thank Mr. Elan Carr and State Senator Lieu for accepting our invitation. This evening, and this discussion informative. I encourage you all, as Jan said, to not only vote, call your friends and family to encourage them to vote. I want to thank Rabbi Wolpe for his By the way, I don't know if you've heard, Rabbi Wolpe's book titled David, it is now going to be...
We hope.
we know? Okay. Because I thought as part of the membership, we're going to have some parts in this movie.
Right.
So this is another benefit to being a member of Sinai.
Whether it'll ever come to be, I don't know.
Anyway, thank you. And by the way, you were a fantastic audience. I appreciate it. And right now, it's actually just 2 minutes before 8:30, so perfect.